Welcome to the Spoon Podcast, where we talk to the builders and makers on the front lines of the food tech revolution. I'm your host, Michael Wolf. Today's conversation is with Sam Rose, who spent her entire career figuring out the puzzle of how to bring consumer products, oftentimes for the kitchen, to life. I got to know Sam about 8 years ago when we were introduced through a mutual friend, Scott Heimendinger, who was working with Sam to develop a next-generation coffee grinder. But this wasn't just any coffee grinder. It was a crazy, tech-forward grinder that would sense the freshness of the beans, use burr grinders to get things just right. In other words, just the kind of thing I was interested in as a kitchen gadget nerd who also ran an event called the Smart Kitchen Summit. But she didn't start with coffee grinders. In fact, her first product wasn't nearly as complicated, at least from a technology standpoint. After being disgusted with a cheap silicone spatula, she thought, why don't I just make my own? And that's just what she did. And so, over the course of Sam's entrepreneur journey, she's not only figured out how to make her own consumer physical products and sell them to hundreds of thousands of consumers, but she's also developed a whole set of business processes and technology that can help others do the same. To top it off, she's also now investing in companies she thinks she can help succeed, and doing so in a category of products, consumer physical goods, that most investors are scared to death of. So let's get to my conversation with Sam Rose.
Hi, Sam Rose from Manifest and Endless Commerce. I've been in the consumer goods business for forever. And I spend my days trying to make that easier for other people.
Maybe not surprisingly, Sam's always been a high achiever. In fact, she went to Yale, edited newspapers and magazines there as an English major, and loved it. But English wasn't what she intended to major in when she first went to college.
I wanted to be an astronaut, and then I went pre-med astronomy major, and then neither of those things worked out.
They didn't work out, not because Sam wasn't capable. She was a pilot in high school after all, and who's a pilot in high school? But because she realized she would likely end up having to be a fighter pilot during the Iraq War, which was going on during the time she was in high school and college. And also the astronomy classes she took weren't exactly what she thought they'd be.
The astronomy classes I was taking weren't like pretty pictures. It was like math, which I really loved, but I was in it for the pretty pictures and for like the adrenaline of it all. And I thought, okay, this is like just really different than I anticipated. And I was done with an English major because of that like intense program in freshman year, which meant that I got to take all sorts of really cool grad classes. So I ended up basically having like a double major in English and in writing and lit and in grad classes, which was an amazing opportunity. So it turned out really great. It was just a very different path than I thought I was going to take.
She soon graduated from Yale, and within a couple years, she started her own business, a company called Get It Right, which started after she had an experience where she wasn't happy with the product she had bought and thought maybe she could do it better.
So I kind of had this kitchen project that I was really into. Again, like a little bit technical, a little bit nerdy. I ran an experiment to make this one-piece silicone spatula. The like problem that started that was that I had a two-piece silicone spatula that was like disgusting inside the hole where the two things came apart. And I thought, well, why don't they just make these out of one piece? So I went looking about for one, couldn't find one, figured I'd prototype it with silicone in my kitchen. That experiment turned out pretty well. Started calling factories. And again, I say this a lot. So if you heard me talk before, you might have heard that the punchline of my life is you can't make 10, but you can make 10,000. And at that point, I started to take it more seriously as a business. And I thought, well, I really like this product. And it seems like other people are kind of interested in it too. How could I possibly afford 10,000 of these things? And crowdfunding was really popular at the time. So I ran this little Kickstarter campaign. And like, I was expecting friends and family to support me. And all these people that I didn't know bought it. And then this like earned media organic machine just took off. And I almost came with it because I had the New York Magazine gift guide put us like in the centerfold and on the front page. And that was incredible. I had buyers at Williams-Sonoma calling and saying, hey, like we're interested in, in pulling you into the store. What are you building next? And had all of those folks who backed the crowdfunding campaign just ask me what was next. And I was like, well, I guess I got to build a line of kitchen tools here. So it's pretty good at designing stuff and pulled in some industrial designers, pulled in some customer support people, kind of like built a little photo studio inside my apartment. And one thing led to another. And like 600 products later, there we were. But it just started as like a fun thing to do on the weekends, really. It went so far beyond that.
That was a special moment in time where I think you can have this idea and then do it on a Kickstarter. I feel like that Kickstarter to do it and get that type of earned media, that era might be over.
I think it is a little bit. I think we enormously benefited from just the mechanics that were how people were consuming product and popular culture at the time. And I definitely think the startup costs for folks who want to break into the consumer goods business have increased substantially. So I wish that we could recreate that moment though, because it allowed so much innovation to happen. And maybe if some of the, I don't know, like bad undersides of that hadn't been so felt by the market, like, folks running a campaign but then like really just taking off with the money, or really ambitious projects being funded but then kind of like not creating enough runway for them to come to life. I think it kind of destroyed some of the ability for people to use such a great kind of collaborative platform to start new businesses. So I haven't solved for that one yet, but it's definitely on my mind.
And you not only did a crowdfunding campaign for a fairly simple product. I call it simple, but like you did a lot to bring this thing to life, but you also did one for a more complicated technical product in your
Yeah.
coffee grinder. Those, it seemed like a vastly, why did you decide to go, oh, I'm going to make this really complicated next generation coffee grinder?
Revenge is a very strong motivator. So no, but in all seriousness, that product was really simple. You're not wrong. Like running the business was complicated, but the product was straightforward. And I kind of quickly became one of, I don't think I am anymore, but certainly for a time I was one of the kind of like global experts on silicone compression molding and just like how to get things made. But it was quickly ripped off, and then I thought, okay, well, I'll tell this story in a different way. I went to the Houseware show the first 1 year, and this is like a big trade show in Chicago that every brand that has a product in this space kind of ends up. It's a rite of passage. So the first year at the show, I've got people flooding into the booth. How did you do this? What are you making next? This is so cool. How come no one has done this before? It was like truly, it was disruptive. And that was exciting and great. And especially for like a one product company, like the way that I made SKUs was I made it in 12 colors. That was like, okay, like this is, we're validated here. Fast forward 12 months, we go back. Everyone's like, what are your key selling points and how do you differentiate from those folks around the corner? Like there were so many ripoffs that all of a sudden this thing that had been perceived as innovative 12 months
Oh my
before was
gosh.
like totally run of the mill the next year. And I think a lot of potential retail partners for us that might have bought from us were just kind of like waiting to see if we would like survive and stick around. So fast forward a couple of years from that, and I'm kind of like, I feel like the poster child for like silicone on a stick. This is where the revenge part of it comes in, because I'm like, you know what? Everyone thinks this is so basic, and I'm so basic. I will show them. I'm going to make the smartest coffee
Oh
grinder
my gosh.
in the universe. And so
Oh
and
my
I'm like
gosh.
an espresso aficionado. So I take like all of the key features that like, if you look on Reddit and you look at what like the espresso world wants out of a small coffee grinder, I'm like, I'm going to do all of that. I'm going to do a stepless grind adjustment. It's going to be battery operated, but you can also plug it into the wall. It'll be high torque. It'll be like these conical ceramic burrs. And oh, it's going to smell your coffee to tell you whether or not it's fresh. And then if it's stale, it'll reorder more for you. Or it'll be like, hey, use this beans for this other use. Or if you really like that bean, what do you like? So I thought, I went from having this simple product that really had like one angle into sales, which was just like, I don't know, retail and direct to consumer, to a platform that was not only a more complicated product, but had defensible IP and had a data stack that you could sell, and had a subscription business model, and had a way to apply what the technology that we built in an industrialized way to like reduce coffee being the biggest expense for coffee roasters globally is wasted coffee beans,
Mm.
and from them going stale post roast. Anyway, so it's not truly a revenge story, but I wanted
Yeah,
to.
the question is who had the last laugh, and was it on you with going too complicated? But before you answer that, I do want
Maybe
to,
it did
those
work.
people, those people that came up to you at that first trade show. Do you think a lot of some of those same people that asked you questions you gave answers to were the ones that came back next year with copycats?
It easily could have been, and that's competition's great. I was
Yeah.
grateful to have more overall awareness, and I think if I had been a little bit more scared, I would have thought, well, that's a signal for me to back off. But instead, I took it as a signal for me to really lean in. So I just thought, you know what, like the name of this brand is Get It Right. I'm going to make products that get it right. They're going to be the best versions of all of these things. And that was exactly what we did. At least I hope. I mean, but popular opinion will prevail.
The coffee grinder, do you feel like it was maybe you're putting too many things, too many bells and whistles if you had to do it over again? Or do you think
Yeah.
you did it right with all these different things?
I think that that business needed some financial partnership in order to thrive. It was really ambitious, and other ambitious smart kitchen products were coming out at the time. But I had, so my husband, who's my business partner, comes from a financial background, and he's like, consumer products aren't backable. So we were like, the only way that we can do this is bootstrap it. That was a little bit of his perspective on the space in general. It's interesting because venture behavior diverged from that significantly for several years. But then I guess the proof is in the pudding. It's really hard to venture back consumer goods businesses. And that's a lot of the, current context that we're in not only the funding landscape, but just the success landscape for consumer goods. So was it fundable? Yes. Did we think it was? No. But I think that was a little bit because perhaps we knew too much. And ultimately, like, I just couldn't bootstrap $200 a unit, cogs. That was really a lot. And I was doing it off of the kind of profit of a $10 product. So that's the reason why that brand kind of is like, I call it iced coffee now. And I'll come back to it one day. Like I do believe in the product, and I think that we struck a chord. And I'm really proud that despite all of the challenges in bringing it to market, we were successful. Like, we delivered to our customers, and that was for me a deeply held commitment.
And I do want to come back to this idea of whether or not you can back consumer products and where we're at with that. But before we get to that, to put a finishing note on your original company, GIR, you eventually sold that off to a company that does roll-ups. Talk about that evolution and where you arrived with that.
Yeah, that was a fun phone call. I founded Gear in 2012. It was acquired by Pattern Brands in 2021. The connection I made to them was really just through a friend. They had started a couple of consumer brands of their own. They were the previous company was called Gin Lane, and they were like kingmakers for direct to consumer. I mean, millennial pink like belonged to them. They invented it. So they kind of turned their sights to creating some unicorns of their own. And a couple of years into that, decided that rolling up successful and profitable brands was the way they were going to approach that. So we were their first acquisition, and really like the folks there. I think part of my I suppose motivation for selling was that I saw in them kind of a partner for high-end direct-to-consumer growth that was really difficult for us to achieve as a bootstrap business. So that, yeah, I can go into any nuances or details about that acquisition, but it was a fun moment, and also scary, because so much of my identity was wrapped up in this one thing that, again, I had started as a kid. And I just kind of didn't know who else I was professionally for a minute. And so disambiguating, yourself as a founder from the business that you found is a hard thing to do. And when it's a business that gets acquired, you have to do it really, really quickly. And so anyway, I broadly amazing feelings and gratitude that that business had the exit that it did, but was also sort of like who am I now? What do I do from here?
So let's talk a little bit more about that. So you got the check, you sold it. That's a fun moment. And did you struggle a little bit trying to figure out what am I going to be now that I've grown up?
When I grow up,
talk about that period. Talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't. I'd seen my way through a little bit of it. I think I had to kind of like self-actualize into it. But by the time Gear was acquired, this business, my second business called Manifest, was effectively already started. And because we were doing stuff for our friends. So Manifest does private label product design and engineering, contract manufacturing and supply chain management, and 3PL. It's kind of like the midsection of the product lifecycle. If you want to get something made or delivered to a customer, we're here to help with that. And I think, kind of a core value for me is I'm here to help. Like, my journey was really interesting and fun. It had its hard moments, and Manifest was kind of my way to formalize helping other people and paying it forward into the industry that I loved. So Manifest was already rolling by the time Gear was acquired, and we had this amazing team, 25 people. And I thought, well, my exit was good, but it wasn't so good that we're all going, to Bali for the next 6 months. Like, the best thing I can do for these wonderful people around me and for myself is start another business with them. So we started Manifest, and have grown that over the past few years. And then started a third business off the tail of that called Endless Commerce, which I can get into, but it's kind of like the SaaS platforming of everything that we got really, really good at in being Manifest, and also in being Gear before that. So this other thing was rolling, and I really just had to, I had to manifest it. I had to create a brand identity for it. I had to start communicating around it. I had to start doing sales for it. I didn't want to let the team down. So I think in retrospect, had I another approach, I don't know if this is more or less valid, but another approach might have been to say, I just want to sit back and learn for a minute and then decide what I want to do next. And I think if I had the financial freedom to do that right now, I absolutely would. The world is changing so quickly. But in the context that we were in at the moment, I felt like the best thing I could do was come to work for my team. And I'm really proud of what that business became. And a lot of the team's still there, which is really cool feeling.
That's cool. So it sounds like the operational engine that drove GIR Gear was this team that ran across design and third-party logistics and all that. Did they essentially acquire the brand and you're making them for them, or do you own a lot of that? How did that kind of disentangle?
Just the acquisition itself?
Yeah. From the operational unit and the company. So it sounds like you kept the engine of a lot of what you did.
Yeah. Well, the asset purchase was the purchase of the brand and all of its IP. Okay. So that went over to Pattern, and then they already had a team. So there was going to be redundancy regardless. So we sort of kept the cohort of clients that were our 3PL clients and carry them forward with us. That's not a piece of what we kind of like, as a team owned that they were interested in acquiring. So it was it was not a difficult tease apart.
And so you built Manifest and you started to take on more clients after that. And you talked a little bit about this operating system, this commerce side. That was something that was, you basically try to productize what you had built and for your own selling of products and sell that to other people.
Yeah. And it's interesting because these things really ladder up from each other. Like, Gear was a team that ran for one brand with pretty verticalized product operations. We learned a lot about how to do things and built a lot of rails for ourselves. Manifest took those rails and turned them into services for other brands. Like, we'll help you get this done a little bit easier. And we kind of like stand on the shoulders of the giants that we were. And Endless is a platforming of that. So it's SaaS that creates true rails against all of those things and helps brands manage their catalog, their orders, their inventory, their demand planning operations, and their fulfillment. And kind of like closes the loop on the system that we wish that we built for ourselves, but we wish we'd had it pre-built for us. Easily would have been a customer of it at the time. So if you're a brand that is in Shopify plus any one other offline channel, could be a mom and pop store, could be Target, Walmart, another big box store, then you kind of need a way to organize your orders and your catalog information, structure the unstructured data that's coming at you to say, hey, when you're fulfilling this wholesale order, follow this routing guide and use this third-party shipping account. And all of that's really complicated and usually takes a lot of people to manage and is separated into a lot of different systems, or what we call point solutions. And Endless really has a point of view of like, hey, let's bring this under one roof, and that'll make it easier for everyone to collaborate in one system and get easier access to the information that they need to run the business and also to grow sales channels.
You have Manifest that does a lot of the physical supply chain and design. Then you have the SaaS, and then you decided to do another thing, and you created essentially an investment company. So talk a little bit about that.
So that's the fourth rung of the ladder, which is to say that sometimes what businesses need are those first two things, like, services or help or knowledge. Sometimes what they need is like a platform to make things, the trains run on time. And sometimes what they need is a capital partner. So Hologram's really focused on taking consumer brands that are in special situations, we call it, where they're either like, in a working capital pinch, or they've got maybe some debt restructuring that needs to happen to help the business continue to be healthy, or they're missing some links in either like the things that we're good at, like supply chain management, fulfillment operations, how to get things made and how to get them around the world. And if capital comes into the picture as a part of that, then Hologram can invest in these businesses and help them kind of reach the next level of scale.
Do they have to have reached a certain level of scale before you're interested? Hey, they've shown that they have success potential.
I want to answer this in two ways. First is for myself, and the second is for Hologram. So I am here to help literally any founder in any situation at any size of scale. Like if you need help, call me or ping me on LinkedIn.
Call Sam direct. Yeah.
Call Sam. There's no problem that is too big or too small, and no founder of any size that I'm not interested in talking to or connecting with. For Hologram to invest, the business is typically somewhere between $3 and $50 million in size. And we could talk to companies that are bigger than that. We can talk to companies that are smaller than that. But one of the challenges as a fiduciary and as kind of a manager of our limited partner capital is that a certain size of smallness, fixing a small business is almost as effortful as starting a new business. So we really need to be talking to businesses that have some traction, some market penetration, some scale in order for the things that we do to really like drive returns for our investors. So, and there's tension in that for me, because again, like I will literally help anybody. And then at the same time, I have to look at like how to deploy capital. And it would be amazing to have a smaller fund that helped even smaller brands. But oftentimes just the economics are difficult to make that work out for when you have outside investors in.
Your husband said that consumer products are not investable. You have a love affair, I think, with consumer products. But so where are we here with this? Because you guys are running an investment firm together. Are you guys primarily focusing on consumer products?
Yeah, we are.
You won the argument. That's what you're saying.
I might have. I think part of the difference is really this perspective around special situations. And I do think that consumer products businesses are investable. I just don't know that they are investable in the way that they were invested in over the past 10 years, which is to say, with a point of view from those funds that they would have a 100x return on the invested capital. I think consumer brand unicorns are really, really difficult. And it's really just, it comes down to COGS and margins. And so SaaS is historically such a great category for early venture stage investment that requires those really outsized returns. And one of the things that makes that really difficult for a consumer business is that to reach those same level of returns, your COGS would have to be, 10%, and they're just not. So do I think that consumer brands are investable? Absolutely, yes. Do I think that they easily pattern match to the investment mechanics that most venture funds require in order to create the types of returns that their investors are interested in? No. And so really it's not are they investable or not? It's what's the anticipated rate of return out of this investment, and is that acceptable to the people that are putting money into it? Because if yes, then then everybody's happy.
You talked about that previous period in investing in venture consumer products, oftentimes hardware, as an anomaly. And I think you're right. It seems like venture funding, as you just explained, doesn't necessarily work for consumer products that are hardware. And I think also the problem with that space was the venture investment distorted and oftentimes kind of just curdled the product result because it gave, they forced upon the company, like, you have to do this, like you have to have a certain type of product with a subscription fee, which in reality, the vision for if the pure vision of the founder was not a subscription fee, but the investor said it had to be, it wasn't always a great match.
Yeah, yeah. I think there was a lot of mismatching, and I think, look, gratitude for money flowing into that space because
Yeah.
I deeply love consumer products and hardware, and the joy of of imagining something and then being able to hold it in your hands is so deep for me. So it was wonderful to see so many founders of brands like that and businesses be able to grow. But I think one of the challenges is that without sustainable growth economics, without basically like a point of view to profitability first, when you're working with tighter margins as consumer businesses are, it's harder to play the types of games that you can play if you're just purely tasked with growth, because that the venture money that flooded in is funding losses. And again, if you can like stop loss on that and then get to profitability on the turn of a dime by just like
Mm-hmm.
limiting your marketing spend, sure. But consumer brands are very capital intensive. I mean, you pay for inventory. Like working capital cycles become really, really important. So I just believe that the dynamics are very different. And it's not that one or the other is investable or not investable, or that everyone did a bad thing when they were trying to do a good thing, but that the outcome expectation
Yeah.
needs to be right sized to the way that, the thing that you're investing into.
I also think, and I was following Smart Home pretty closely at the time, there was a unique point in time where the big tech platform guys decided that they needed to get into, for example, smart home. And it was at the beginning of what I think was consumer pricing for truly powerful IoT. So you saw things like the Nest thermostat, and you saw things like the drop cam, which were new categories that were potentially going to be big. But after about 5 years, Google had done all their acquisitions. Amazon had done some acquisitions. And I think those big checks went away.
Yeah. Well, and I think you see some similar mechanics in pharmaceuticals, right? There's the R&D for these sorts of products can be so substantial. If you don't have an enormous budget and plenty of runway for it, you will pop. And then I think there's the question of consumer trust in that context, because if there's a dozen businesses out there that are faithfully, and sort of diligently trying to build products, but end up at the end of their runway. And for example, they're taking crowdfunding money and putting into the development cycle and not just into production, then consumers end up getting let down. And, the whole, that system was workable. It just didn't quite find the gears that it needed to. And I think it kind of, shrugged or imploded as a result. But if more
The,
folks had been able to deliver on those really ambitious products, then maybe we'd still be seeing that today.
I think that the sorry point for me, or the sadness there, is I think we see potentially less innovation when it's just left up to like the Whirlpools and the Samsungs to do all the kitchen innovation, because I think you need some of these new ideas. So you got to need how do we fund that? And maybe you guys, what you're doing is the answer. Hey, we can maybe fund some of these guys who have a big idea outside of the traditional venture funding framework, but also they don't have to be a division of Samsung.
Yeah, I mean, I think innovation labs inside larger organizations like that are certainly like still, churning out amazing new things. I don't have the answer for it yet. I mean, innovation is expensive, and you have to have a really long-term view to getting a return on that investment for it to work. And as a smaller business, it's harder to do without some outside capital. So there's definitely tension there. Like, it's easier to innovate inside a large organization insofar as you have rolling capital available to you if it doesn't exactly go to plan. But then again, those larger businesses, they're publicly, many of them are publicly traded. They've got a duty to like spend their capital wisely, and they can't just
Yeah.
invest in losses. So I don't know the answer yet, but I do think that it's worth continuing to try to solve for it, because uh, as always, like folks who've got, everything to gain and nothing to lose are going to have and have a appetite for risk are going to be the ones that are really pushing the edge of innovation. And that's been true since probably the invention of the wheel.
Well, I think what's interesting is I think there's no better time than to be an inventor or innovator because these tools have been democratized. So you can actually come up with this really cool prototype in your home, or if you're smart about this, the MIT graduate or the University of Washington graduate could come up with a great prototype. It's that getting it into scaled production that is impossible without that big funding, whether through venture or through corporate funding.
I mean, what I'd love to see is for manufacturers to get some skin in the game with it, and often they do. But I think that's really fertile ground. If there were a better platform for manufacturers to make strategic investments into inventors or inventions that showed promise, then maybe there's like some sort of double-sided marketplace there.
How do you describe yourself? Because I feel like you're doing so many things. You have all these different companies under your broader portfolio. But when you tell people at a cocktail party, like what you do, what do you say? Like a couple sentences.
This used to be so much easier because I would
Yeah, I make
introduce
spoons. I make
myself.
spoons.
I make spatulas. And people were like,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I'm here to help founders and people who want to start businesses and help them grow. And so I think that generally I describe myself as a person who's just invested in the consumer landscape. There's a handful of different ways that I approach it. And so sometimes I just say, I'm here to help. If you've got a thing that you're trying to make, there's a bunch of different angles that, I might be able to help with it, either in thinking about it or in getting it done or in bringing it to the next level. That's not like a clean byline, but the
No, but
best.
I think I'm here to help founders. That's a great byline. I think, and by the way, I was just on your podcast and maybe we can release them on the same week. So
We should.
hi new people, if you're coming over. But I don't know if I mentioned on yours, but when you told me when we had a conversation a couple months ago that you wish you could take a break and just spend a year learning about AI, I thought that was really interesting. And we talked about how the rules of the game are changing. And I feel like you're pretty good at this old world of SEO. I call it old world, like it's the past. But
Mm.
SEO is finally or quickly, the rules of SEO are getting thrown in the garbage because of what Google, for example, is doing with their AI results. So talk about that. Like do you feel like you're getting left behind or you feel pretty comfortable? And like, how do you just want to take this hiatus and learn about the new world?
I wish I could take a break. I'm building so many things, and really, it's just I feel a deep obligation to my team and our current customers and all of the different businesses to kind of like show up and push it all forward. But if I had the latitude to take a break, I think the thing that makes me nervous about building especially a software platform in this era is that the ease of building is becoming so much easier. So if you kind of like it's almost easier to do this in a retrospective way than in a predictive way. Like if you look at what it took to build Netflix or any of kind of the early generation SaaS and big consumer goods brands in like 1995 to 2005, you had to have someone sitting there like plugging a server room together and like just and like building software literally from the code up. And now you look at like what it is like to build from 2015 to 2025 and you're like who needs a server? Like no one's ever.
Yeah, it's all on AWS.
Yeah, it's all in the cloud. So the requirements, the technical requirements for building successfully are changing very, very quickly in a similar way. And I think that's so exciting because now that we can talk to our machines, and this is going to make my English major really pay off, I can just describe in natural language what I want to build, and I've got a co-pilot to build it. Whereas 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago, if I was building, what I would need to do is describe that to a coder who would need to be good at interpreting what I'm saying, and then like sit there, for 2 months or whatever, and like literally write the code. So the speed of innovation is changing so
Yeah.
rapidly. And I think if I were afforded the opportunity to just step back and watch it, I might be able to see trajectory and velocity of that a little bit better. Like right now, I just feel like I'm in it and I can mostly feel like it's moving in a direction, but I still got to keep building. And the challenge with that is just perspective. And I think that if anyone out there is in a position where they can take a break and learn for a minute before diving into building what they're building, I am almost certain that the product would be way better as a result in 3 or 5 years from now. And if you're already building, don't stop, but just if you can, spend as much time absorbing the information that's available about how these new tools are enabling people like me with English majors to code systems from scratch in a weekend, which I've done. And it's really fun. And I couldn't have done that 10 years ago.
Amazing. All right. Well, you also have your podcast, and it's called Best Day Ever, which is a great name for a podcast. So I would recommend people listen to that. Where else can people find what you're doing?
I have a website at SamanthaRose.co where you can see the multiple different bylines to describe how I might be able to help you. If you're looking for help in either building a product or manufacturing a product or getting it around the world, then you can go to manifest.com. Manifest is spelled with a V. It's like Mavinifest, but it's an upside down A. And if you're looking for a piece of SaaS that can help you with your orders or inventory management, then check out endlesscommerce.com.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you so much for having me on. We'll have to do it again. Maybe we can do like quarterly dueling podcasts, and we'll just keep pushing the envelope on what the AI landscape is affording us all and what we've built.
All right. It's a plan. Thanks, Sam.
Cheers.
That's it for the Spoon Podcast this week. Sam Rose and Manifest and the Best Day Ever podcast, talking about why it's important to keep learning and leveraging new tools like AI to stay nimble and reinvent yourself even when you have to keep on building and keep your business moving forward. If you haven't already, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really does help, and we will read your review and give you a shout out in upcoming episodes. All right, folks, that's it for now. We'll talk to y'all soon.